Welcome back to another episode of Structured Insights, where we cut through the noise of enterprise technology and get to what really matters to IT and security leaders. I'm Nick Dinsmore, and today we're going to be diving into a topic that I think is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, which is going to be managed detection and response, the future of the SOC. And today, as always, joining me, Mr. Bill Tracy is back. How you doing, Bill?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bill, of course, has a very unique perspective, I think. When he's not traveling around and whiteboarding and at meetings, he's obviously works a lot with enterprise leaders trying to solve all these messy issues, and really does have a great perspective on the high stakes issues with MDR, with SOC. So again, Bill, great to have you back. And I think this will be great to really help people. I'm going to dub it the MDR explainer session. So we're going to try to help people understand what MDR is, what managed detection response is, differs from just having a regular SOC. So with that, so people don't have to Google right now what MDR is. What does it mean? I mean, what is managed detection response in basic layman's terms?
Sure. At the end of the day, the idea around MDR, managed detection and response, is helping organizations get extra eyes on critical indicators of compromise, security events, security alerts within their organization, so that they can continue threat hunting and remediating any gaps or potential breaches, hopefully before they happen.
So given that definition, I mean, what is the biggest myth? Let's just start off with that, right? I mean, it has been in the news a lot lately. What do you think the biggest myth that enterprises still believe about MDR managed SOC?
Well, I think there's probably several myths, but I think that what I really see around MDR and as folks are evaluating solutions is really an MDR provider will secure you. And the reason I say that is because there are so many different flavors of MDR, and all MDRs kind of become an industry term. You might hear MDR, XDR, managed SOC, outsourced SOC, managed
EDR.
security services, EDR. And so organizations really need to, I think, look very intrinsically understand maybe where the gaps in their cybersecurity teams and threat hunting and response teams are, as they look through different MDR and managed SOC providers to find the right one that fills the right gaps for their enterprise, because they're not all created equally and they're all great in different ways for different types and sizes of organizations. But just getting an MDR service is not going to make you secure.
So the issue is if somebody, if a CIO or director of IT says, they buy it for the wrong reasons, basically.
Yeah, and really kind of MDR evolved from a term that you mentioned, EDR, which is endpoint detection and response. And then M became managed detection and response. And I'll throw even another one in there. MEDR was kind of where this whole space started. At the end of the day, our endpoints are the most vulnerable spots in our network, right? Servers, workstations, users. So that's a natural place where there's a lot of events, a lot of alerts, a lot of noise that has to be filtered out by security teams. And so I put an agent in that pulls a bunch of telemetry from those systems, step one, but now I got a bunch of telemetry data, logs, and alerts that I have to go review. So let's add a managed service, an extra set of eyes and ears on top of that endpoint data to help organizations kind of filter, classify, and that's really where the space started. And if I look, that was years ago. If I look to where it is now, that's where you can have fully outsourced managed SOC providers, but not every MDR company offers that level of data ingestion and visibility across the entire enterprise stack.
So what you're saying is, and this is the difference between, I think, sometimes marketing and reality, right? Or sales and reality. I mean, MDR, typically when I see it out there in the market, they market it as, eyes on glass, 24/7. Like it's, somebody's there. Like it's constantly being monitored. That's not really necessarily the case, though, right? In all MDR circumstances, or I guess maybe I guess how much of it's, human driven versus, automation driven.
Well, and I think another thing we'll probably explore more. But I would say that even a little bit differently. I would say that it is extra 24/7 eyes on glass, whether that's humans, machines, AI, or some combination of. But really, it's what information is being presented to that glass. If I'm only pulling in endpoint telemetry, I'm missing network flow data. I'm missing firewall logs. Maybe I'm missing other critical infrastructure logs and inputs that I may need to really have a picture of my entire enterprise. And I will never not argue that having any MDR service, even if it's focused only on endpoint, is extremely valuable. It absolutely is valuable and helps a company upgrade their security posture, move in the right direction. But again, with all the best people and AI systems, et cetera, looking at the glass, all that data, all that telemetry has to be within that lens, to really get enterprise-wide value across the organization.
That's interesting. So I mean, yeah, if you go in thinking I'm buying MDR, I get this, but in reality, it's this narrow bit of data versus this much data. Your insights are going to be drastically different, right? Like what you're going to be able to actually hunt and understand and provide action on, right?
Yeah, and I think that really, as we go into like the kind of the second phase, right? Something anomalous has been detected. From that point forward, there's a whole bunch of additional investigation and remediation that I have to do as an organization. Has that threat moved laterally? Is it moving through the network? Is it attacking data stores or critical infrastructure or other sensitive data throughout my organization? And that's where kind of having that holistic visibility is very valuable to do that correlation, that investigation, etc. Many of these threats, begin and emerge from the endpoint, but I want to also see what else is it doing, how is it transiting the network, who am I trying to
Mm.
connect to, and being able to kind of correlate all that data together, because that can also help me with my, the other problem, right? We're all on alert fatigue. Whether it's users on Teams and text and email, or it's a SOC analyst with tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of alerts. Again, maybe I prioritized all of my endpoint alerts, but I still have 30 or 40 things to go investigate and look into. Where if I'm pulling telemetry from other sources in my environment, from network flow data, from firewalls, from network devices, et cetera, can I further even refine that list down to go, okay, out of these 30 or 40, I got to go look at all of them, but I got to go look at these 10 right now. The other two or the other 30 maybe can wait till this afternoon, or
Right.
whatever. So I think it
It's
adds
prioritization.
having a holistic view gives you much richer data, much richer intelligence when you're doing that threat hunting and that investigation, that remediation phase of detecting something malicious in your environment.
So let me ask you this: and this is maybe a little tangential, but I know that enterprises and even mid enterprises that deal with RFPs, right? In the space of there are more and more people trying to seek out opportunities, and I know that I've noticed in RFPs that have come out lately, obviously security is a big thing, and I wonder, should somebody that gets a response back that says, the box was checked, like, yeah, I do MDR, what advice would you give somebody that's saying like, okay, they say they have that, and that, so I'm going to give them X many points on this RFP, but hmm, it sounds like from this conversation they should maybe have some follow-up questions.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors to consider there. I mean, a couple things that we often see kind of during, maybe you call it the vendor interview phase, or as you're looking deeper into the solutions, maybe post RFI or RFP, is you know um, asking some very specific questions around maybe a current relevant threat.
Okay.
Right now, scattered spiders out there, everywhere, and everybody's thinking about it. How are you handling it? How have you responded to these incidents? How have you protected your customers around those specific examples? Talking to MDR providers about what are their incident investigation techniques, capabilities, and teams. How are they? How do they operate? After, say, an MDR provider does detect a breach, do they have remediation capabilities or not? That's another important distinction. And you think, I'll say you have to ask a few extra questions there, because remediation again can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. Many MDR providers will provide you kind of guided, over the shoulder help and support as your team is hands on keyboard fixing issues. They're with you. Some might only say, yeah, we send you the alerts, we let you know it's a priority, you need to go fix it, call us back if you need help.
Right.
So, some will actually push automations to your playbooks or to your systems to actively block things. So diving into that remediation side. And then I think the last piece is really around maybe how are they detect something, what are their additional steps in their investigative systems around trying to correlate that, what's happening in email and in Microsoft 365 or G Suite, what's happening in other areas of the network. Are they just alerting and say, hey, we saw this bad thing? Or is it, hey, we saw this bad thing, we took a look at email, looks okay, don't see any data going to OneDrive, all of those kinds of things. Are they taking that extra step as part of that process? Or is it, hey, we did the alert, we met our SLA, and
You're good to go.
Go fix this.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so clearly a lot of questions people should be asking. It's like, where's the data dictionary to make sure all the definitions are right when you do this?
There should be a lot of level setting of terms, and I think one thing that we certainly recommend and help and encourage our clients to do when evaluating these solutions is to ask those questions, ask the same question 3 different ways, really dive into that. And I'll throw a 5th one in there just because I think it's relevant. And this was, another one that came up in a recent conversation I was having. Was another value of an MDR provider is that they have, hundreds, thousands of clients, and they're getting that data. What insights can those MDR providers give you based on maybe it's your organization size, maybe it's your attack profile or attack surface type, maybe it's your industry. Hey, we're seeing fintech is being hammered really hard by this, this malware threat or through this attack vector. Here's a heads up. We don't see it in your environment yet, but know that your peers are getting hammered with this.
Right.
Be aware, be ready. We're increasing or tuning our detections because you're a fintech customer, or because you're a big public, name brand with a very large attack surface out on the interwebs. We want you to have extra eyes to look for these behaviors, look for these threats, or look for these attacks that are common across your industry. What kind of data intel can they share due to this huge database, data log, data lake that they have?
Interesting. Okay. So let's jump to economics. So, if you, again, marketing, sales, positioning, MDR, a lot of times, especially to very large enterprises, is pitched as, similar model is like just an MSSP, right? Like it's cheaper to get an MDR versus go build your own SOC, right? That's the model, just like model of MSSPs versus having in-house people. What, from your perspective though, like one, I guess, is that true in practice? And then 2, is it, are there hidden costs that when you're thinking about talking to an MDR provider that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think there's, I might answer this question a little bit differently based on maybe the customer size, client profile that can play into this. But generally, like most things as a service, there's not a hard, fast, hey, I'm just replacing X amount of CapEx and OpEx with this OpEx as a service. It's great. Everything's good, right? These services come at a cost. So it's understanding the value benefit to your organization. When I think of our small and medium enterprise clients, they probably don't have SOC tools. They don't have a SOAR tool. They don't, they may or may not have a SIM. They may be doing just some basic log retention for compliance reasons. To go build that from scratch is very expensive. And then hiring and retaining the people is expensive and difficult in today's world. Cybersecurity engineers, SOC analysts
right?
are still in extremely high demand. So often I would argue that in small, medium enterprise, this is a big added cost to the enterprise, to put it real bluntly, but is probably more cost effective than going in, building and rolling your own. And then you're going to get the benefits of 24/7, et cetera. As we move to like our medium enterprise customers, which we're seeing a ton of kind of MDR ask in those, it gets much more nuanced because in those organizations, you're figuring out how do I fit an MDR or a managed SOC provider into my SOC that I have, and you're starting to divide up roles, you're starting to divide up duties, tasks, etc. Can I up level my current SOC folks to go handle, hands-on keyboard, advanced investigation, et cetera, while just taking all of the triage of the, tier one and tier two alerts and automated playbook actions. Yeah. I see malware on a host, quarantine it immediately. You don't have to ask. I don't want to talk to anybody. Quarantine that thing. Okay. Now we got to go figure out what else it did, what else we need to quarantine. But, often what we see in those mid to larger enterprises, they're trying to have extra eyes on glass and have extra tier one and tier two kind of remediations and actions and investigations take place before their team gets it. So it's very much like that kind of up leveling, upskilling. I'm going to let my FTEs go focus on really important stuff and really important alerts. And then the rest of the time, they're working on enterprise strategy, enterprise education, right? Cybersecurity education is the biggest thing any organization can do to protect themselves, regardless of how much they're spending on tools and services. So why don't I refocus my security team to be educating my users and educating my user base on how to safely and effectively and securely transact business every day? That's way more valuable than pouring through alert logs. So like in mid to large enterprise, we're not usually seeing SOC replacement, it's SOC augmentation. And that's where kind of going through vendors and partners gets much more nuanced, and you need to spend a lot more time asking those questions, figuring out what capabilities they're going to bring, how does that overlap with your existing capabilities, and what are maybe the holes or gaps in your current capabilities within your SOC. And there's absolute economics for mid to large enterprise there. Again, training and maintaining those, your tier one analysts and the alert log and the alert fatigue, all it does is burn out your team. And eventually you have tier threes and tier four experts just helping with the deluge of information coming in. There's more important tasks those folks could and should be working on. That's where an MDR managed SOC provider can help augment a mid-large enterprise business.
I think you hit on, several important points, but you mentioned burnout. And I think that's something that maybe people don't, and even like CTO, like CFOs, people maybe not in this space can understand that. I mean, SOC burnout is, those of us in the industry, like, it's pretty well known, right? Like, it's not, it's not great. It's not great. And so, like, I think maybe as a way, to your point of like, can they focus on higher value work, or work that's not going to potentially burn them out so quickly? That human piece of it, I think, is pretty important, and when you think about MDR, right?
Rather than just pouring through lines of code like Trinity or Neo from the Matrix, all day. They're very much like your background. That's what you're doing. SOC analyst and incident investigation kind of feels like in the real world. And so, and I think you hit an important point that from a CFO, COO, CEO board level, right? It's we need to be secure. We have to be secure. That's the mission statement. That's loud and clear, but they don't always have great perspective on day in the life of a SOC analyst. And so you take what is highly important, but in the moment can, I think, feel very monotonous for some. You're just pouring over alerts and logs and over and over and over. And then in a market that's highly competitive, way understaffed, way underskilled, there's tons of opportunity for folks that are looking to add a cyber security analysts and cybersecurity experts in. That's what makes the kind of employee retention and building and managing and maintaining your own SOC so difficult, because it's a really important skill. It's highly employable, and it can be, very, I don't know, mind numbing is the wrong word. I don't know the right word. It's coming right off my tongue to say right now, but when you're in the trenches all day, it's a lot.
Brutal. Well, let's talk about the kind of practical advice though for the people that are at all different levels, whether it be mid-enterprise or enterprise. I mean, we've talked about things to watch out for in RFPs and things to ask the questions, but let's talk about the board level, like when they are interviewing vendors and trying to ask questions, what are some red flags that you think that people maybe go down the path of asking that maybe they shouldn't, and they just, because it's a distraction versus the thing that really you should be demanding of a vendor in a contract when you're thinking about this type of service?
Red flags are hard to quantify, um, but I think that a couple are that um, you know uh, think about like we do MDR. You're secure. The answer to every question is yes, and there's no follow on. I mean, that to me, and it sounds silly, but
Yeah.
unfortunately I see it happen all the time. Right? It's a reality of what it is. If an MDR provider cannot articulate all of the different telemetry and data sets that they are able to see and pull in, if they can articulate what their incident investigation uh, capabilities and breadth are, and if they can't talk in detail about how they participate in remediation, those are three big kind of what I would call red flags for almost any MDR provider. And it doesn't mean that it maybe rules them out based on your need, but
Hmm.
they need to be able to talk about and articulate really clearly what they will and will not do. And you almost have to run through like a mock incident with them as part of that interview. I think the folks that I see are wonderful vendor partners bring to the conversation. It's always really telling as well, right? Or do they have engineers or analysts or help desk customer success people that are kind of in the trenches every day, part of that selling motion? I think that's really valuable. Those are the folks that are interacting in the field with customers every day, whether it be behind the scenes on the alerts and the triages, or as that next layer of integration and of integration with their SOC teams and communication with their SOC teams at the client. I think that those are also really important because those are the folks who are going to really be able to kind of walk through a day in a life of an alert or an incident with them as an MDR provider. So I think that's where I tell clients to really kind of hammer home and ask a lot of additional questions.
So how important is it, the technology versus the provider, right? I mean, with MDR, with all tech cybersecurity services, right? There's folks like Structure that do this, that are experts in this space, and then there's the technology that's behind it, that powers it. Is it, I guess, which one is more important at this point when it comes to MDR?
I think that it's a very
You can be
symbiotic
biased. It's
relationship.
okay.
No, it's a very symbiotic relationship at the end of the day. But I think an example is there are great EDR vendors that provide phenomenal protection tools for the endpoint. And all of them have some level of MDR service, or nearly all of them have some level of MDR service you can add, or you can go to a third party provider to add that MDR service on top of their endpoint. At the same time, there's great MDR provider partners and managed SOC partners that work great with things like Windows Defender as an endpoint. So we have many clients that have Defender and another EDR, or have just one or the other running in their environment. And again, that's where you start getting into, tools versus services, company, partner, whatever you want to call it there for that provider, is that I can layer the right provider on top of nearly any modern, fully capable endpoint solution like Defender Type 2,
Hmm.
even, and get a very valuable service and outcome out of that. But there's also plenty of reasons to also look at the EDR providers that offer MDR, the CrowdStrikes of the world, Palo Alto Cortex, et cetera, to either augment or replace something like Defender and then layer an MDR service on. And part of that, it goes back to exactly what I was talking about earlier, of that understanding where's the gaps in my enterprise, where are the challenges I'm experiencing, and what kind of services do I need, that help us kind of triangulate and define maybe what the right path for any given customer is. I mean, the reality is that there's probably, our clients today have a choice of 10 different really good EDR MDR products, and there's many hundreds, but even if I try to distill that number down, say 10 really good MDR MSOC providers
Yeah.
and 10 really good EDR MEDR endpoint type partners, and then there's a whole gray area of overlap in the middle. But if we look at what's happened in the industry over the last few years, most of the standalone MDR managed SOC players have acquired or partnered with an endpoint solution. All of the endpoint vendors have developed or partnered with a managed solution to help fill those gaps. And then it's really figuring out what else do those providers offer. Many of our customers are trying to get off of legacy SIEM platforms,
Yeah.
SIEM platforms, and many of the MDR providers do offer that. But again, it's another qualification point you have to understand. Many managed SOC and MDR providers provide call it a SIEM as part of their core functionality, but that may not meet your organization's needs as a SIEM and a logging platform. So things like data retention, speaking back to costs earlier, I need to keep my data for 7 years. Well, I can probably do that with any MDR vendor, but it might be extremely cost prohibitive to do so. So we have to come up with other solutions. If I have reasons for data retention requirements or internal investigation purposes, and I want to keep that data longer, most of your MDR providers are looking at 30, 60, 90 kind of as a window of hot data, and then maybe up to a year of archive data. But anything beyond that, you're probably going to pay for, and that storage certainly comes at a premium typically, because it's really all hot data to them. It's not like cold storage data that I do. Okay, I keep my when I'm doing my own on-prem SIEM, I got log data for a year, and then I've got 6 years of retention data, but it's indexed, it's put on cold storage. It's really, really cost effective to do so that way.
So basically, if a company wants to move from the minor league to the major league, make sure that you've got the right players, and don't assume it's going to be the same cost.
No, this is and look, this is a big investment for organizations. It's something they should be taking seriously, and they need to ask a lot of questions to help find the right tool and the right partner that's going to truly partner with them as an enterprise to accomplish their security goals.
Well, let's talk one more topic, really, and as we've often done on this podcast, we've talked about the future and trying to predict the future between AI and technology. And I'm just, obviously there's AI is predominant out there in the market, or using from helping analysis and insights. Does the concept, I guess, of MDR or centralized SOC, like having this world where we can have all this together, does this survive, or do you think that this is going to continue to evolve with the technology that's coming out? And won't hold you anything. I'm just curious your opinion of how this will play, because obviously technology is changing so rapidly.
As we look, maybe if we pick a target timeline of 5 years, just give or take, right? The quintessential 5 years out. Yes, I think that this MDR space continues to be highly relevant, if not more so. I think it continues to evolve rapidly, but I think there are a few reasons. Number one is AI, and I'm not speaking to how these tools might use AI. I'll talk about that in a second, but securing different AI environments and having the right eyes to understand and interpret AI traffic, agentic AI systems, et cetera, and providing these eyes on glass for those systems is going to be really important. And as organizations continue to have AI tool sprawl, how do I train my team to keep up with alerting and incident investigation and response and IOCs, et cetera, around all these AI and agentic AI platforms? So I think that's a reason that companies will continue to look to outsourced services to help from a just maturity and skill set standpoint. And I think the other piece is kind of where I was leading into there, is that I see this space continuing to evolve, using AI to enhance the capabilities to do even more SOAR, security orchestration automation response type capabilities. Is how can I go even a step or two further to continue to put in remediations, protections in near real time once my tools, my MDR managed SOC tools detect something, using AI and orchestration and automation to not only just quarantine an endpoint, for example, but push additional protections throughout my enterprise. that I need. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for AI to greatly enhance an MDR service. And again, something that would generally be very, very cost prohibitive, maybe for an organization to put in place by finding the right partner and the right tool set that can do that. I think we're going to see a big shift over the next 5 years to trusting SOAR/AI to take actions in the network. I think there's still a lot of resistance in the market to that today. But you're starting to see that around all these AI-enabled tools that our different vendor manufacturers are. They're kind of starting to roll them out slowly. These, AI bots or agentic AI pieces. Hey, we can reboot a switch port if we see, a change in state. Okay, well, if it went from passing 80% traffic all the time to 0, there's a problem. Bouncing that port's not going to do anything wrong or do anything bad because it's not passing anything right now. Well, again, if I know there is a known bad entity actor that has just emerged that has compromised an endpoint in my environment, why not push block rules or block lists to the firewall? And I think we're going to see this pivot towards a little bit of, some slightly increased appetite for a fail closed model in some instances than kind of the, call it, almost fail open model today. A user can't get online or can't get to a site and can't work. Well, what's the tolerant appetite for that? If I can have that detection done in seconds, have a human eye on it for minutes, and then have an automated tool push it, and there's a 15-minute push, and then, okay, well, this one was a false positive. I took a user offline for 15 minutes, but I got alerts. My team looked at it, undo changes, click a button, everything's back to normal. I think that we're going to start to see a shift in appetite towards more automated and AI-driven responses to preventing or blocking security threats. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. I think this is a 5-10 year type evolution, but I certainly think over the next 5 years, we're going to see a drastic shift today that's just near zero to, some amount of percentage points in that direction over the next 5 years.
Well, good thing this is recorded. We can go back in 5 years and see if you were right.
Wouldn't be the first time I was wrong. So.
Let me end with one final question. And I think I'm just curious, based on what you just said and the predictions, should MDR really be thought of as a utility versus a premium service? Like, is it something that it's must have, like power and broadband, like, versus like, hey, this is all right. I don't need this.
Yeah, I think as I look 5 years out, I think that nearly every organization of any size will have some type of MDR managed SOC augmentation service. I think it's unavoidable. And again, I'm seeing the vendors and the technologies better align with business requirements to provide that flexibility. Again, it may be for a large organization. I just want eyes on those endpoints. I want eyes just on my servers. Maybe we feel like we have the endpoints covered. But I need extra eyes on my servers, my critical assets, my cloud assets that are sprawling and hard to manage and being spun up, willy-nilly by DevOps teams. There is still a ton of value. So do I think that large organizations are going to completely outsource their SOC? No, I don't think so. But I think they will be buying some sort of MDR managed SOC augmentation to their teams to support specific use cases and niche requirements. And it will be very much, I think buying MDR will be like buying a firewall.
Right. What a transition we've had, right? Over the last several years. Well, Bill, obviously, as always, thanks a lot for going deep on this. I think, just to recap, people listening should walk away thinking, when you're thinking about MDR and SOC decisions, don't get caught up in the buzzwords. Focus on asking the right questions and also probably some uncomfortable questions to those people that you're interviewing. And I think if you're taking into consideration for any kind of security services, also make sure that your team, and even as you mentioned earlier, the board, right? Like beyond IT is thinking about these types of things. So I think great insights for clarity, transparency, and impact. So thank you again. And this has been another episode of Structured Insights. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.